My name is Ava Reynolds. I am 26 years old, and the night my family tried to erase me, they did it with cardstock, place cards, and a microphone. It happened at my cousin's wedding in Charleston, in a ballroom full of magnolias and champagne, and people who believed they were watching a love story. What they were actually watching was a performance my parents had been rehearsing for years. In their version, my younger brother was the only child worth celebrating. I was the awkward footnote they kept off the page. If you have never been the family's convenient problem, you might not understand how precise erasure can be. It is not one big dramatic act. It is 1,000 small edits. A cropped photo, a missing name, a story told without you, a joke that lands on you like a stamp. And then, one day, the edits become official. They get printed, they get handed out to strangers, they get read aloud. I had promised myself I would just get through the wedding. Smile, congratulate my cousin, eat the chicken, go back to my apartment in Atlanta, and keep building a life that didn't rely on my parents' approval. I already had one foot outside their system. I didn't know they were about to slam the door on the other foot. My parents, Diane and Mark Reynolds, loved being described as devoted. They had perfected the art of looking like good people from a distance. My mother volunteered for every committee that came with a group photo. My father told stories about hard work and family values that sounded humble until you realized he only told them when someone was watching. They were not villains in the obvious way. They were villains in the quiet way that makes everyone doubt the victim. My brother, Logan, was 23 and built like a golden retriever in human form. Charming, careless, always forgiven. He could be late, messy, irresponsible, and my parents would call it youthful. If I was late, it was disrespect. If I was messy, it was instability. If I was irresponsible, it was proof that something was wrong with me. Growing up, I learned the house rules without anyone saying them out loud. Logan was the story. I was the shadow. Logan's mistakes were private. My mistakes were announcements. Logan's feelings were emergencies. My feelings were inconveniences. When you live in that kind of system, you start to shrink on purpose. You start to apologize with your posture. I left for college the moment I could. I chose a school in Georgia, even though my parents wanted me closer. And I built my independence the way you build a fire in damp weather. Slowly, stubbornly, with a lot of smoke at first. I worked in the library, then a coffee shop, then internships. After graduation, I got a job in Atlanta as a project coordinator for a hospital network. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable and mine. I paid my own rent. I paid my own phone bill. I built a life my parents couldn't take credit for. The only reason I still showed up to family events was my grandmother, Elsie. She had the kind of presence that made people lower their voices without knowing why. When my parents called me dramatic, Grandma Elsie called me observant. When my parents called me difficult, Grandma Elsie called me honest. She didn't fight them in public often. She just stood near me like a shield and let her silence say what my parents refused to admit. The wedding was for my cousin Brooke, my mom's sister's daughter. Brooke was the kind of person who made everyone feel included on purpose. She was marrying Caleb, a man who laughed with his whole face. The invitations were classic: cream paper, gold script, a wax seal with their initials. My mother acted like the wedding was a family Olympics, and she was the coach. 3 months before the ceremony, my mother called me on a Tuesday night. Her voice was sweet, which was always the first sign of danger. She said the family wanted to do something special at the reception, a slideshow honoring generations. She said she had been asked to help coordinate it because she was organized. She said she wanted me to contribute photos from my childhood. The request sounded normal, but the way she said contribute made my stomach tighten, like she was asking for material, not memories. Still, I emailed her a folder of photos. Me at 6 with a missing front tooth, me at 12 holding a science fair ribbon, me at 16 in a choir dress. Not because I trusted her, because part of me still wanted to be seen. My mother responded with a heart emoji and nothing else. A week later, she texted asking if I was bringing a plus one. I said yes, my boyfriend Ethan. Ethan was 28, an architect, kind in the ways that matter. He didn't try to fix my family. He believed me when I described them. He asked what I needed. That alone made him dangerous to my parents' story. My mother answered with one sentence that looked casual and felt sharp. "Let's not make the wedding about you, Ava." I stared at the screen for a long time. I hadn't asked to make anything about me. I had asked for a chair for someone I loved. 2 weeks before the wedding, my cousin Brooke called. Her voice sounded embarrassed. She said she was finalizing seating and noticed something strange. My RSVP showed as one person, not two. I told her I had RSVP'd for two. Brooke hesitated, then said she would fix it. She apologized and said she thought it was a glitch. It wasn't a glitch. My parents had access to the family email chain because my mother insisted on being the helper. She had quietly changed my response. Ethan offered to skip if it caused drama. I told him no. If I started shrinking again, I would never stop. We drove to Charleston the morning of the rehearsal dinner. The city smelled like salt and jasmine. The hotel was all white columns and polished brass, the kind of place where the staff calls everyone ma'am, like it's a gift. Brooke hugged me tight when we arrived and whispered that she was glad I came. My parents hugged me like I was a distant relative they were obligated to greet. Logan arrived late to the rehearsal dinner and still managed to get applause. He swept into the courtyard with a grin, wearing a linen suit like he was on a magazine cover. My mother fussed over him in front of everyone, smoothing his collar, laughing too loudly at his jokes. My father clapped him on the back and told a story about Logan always being the one who brings the light. I stood beside Ethan and watched my parents feed the myth in real time. That night, in our hotel room, Ethan asked me if I wanted to leave. I said no, not because I enjoyed pain, because I had spent my whole life leaving my own body whenever my parents decided to rewrite me. This time, I wanted to stay present. The next day was the ceremony. Outdoor vows under an oak draped with Spanish moss, white chairs, a string quartet. Brooke looked radiant, the kind of radiant you get when you feel safe. I cried when she walked down the aisle, not because of my parents, because seeing someone cherished makes you realize what you were missing. The reception took place in a ballroom with tall windows and a dance floor that reflected the lights like water. Place cards sat on a long table at the entrance, each one a small promise of where you belonged. Ethan and I walked up together and searched for our names. We found Ethan's name on a card. It was placed at table 12 with a group of Brooke's college friends. We did not find my name beside it. We found my name alone on a card at table 21, in the far corner near the service door. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. Then I saw my mother's face across the room. She was watching us with a polite smile, the kind you wear when you know something and want to see if someone else figures it out. My father stood beside her with a drink, calm, observant. Logan leaned in to whisper something to them and they all laughed. Ethan reached for my hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. My body understood. This was not a seating glitch. This was a message. I walked to Brooke's wedding planner, a woman named Maris who had a headset and the energy of someone who could coordinate a hurricane. I showed her the place cards and asked if the seating chart could be wrong. Maris checked her tablet and frowned. She said the chart had been updated yesterday afternoon from a shared account used by the family liaison. The liaison name on the account was Diane Reynolds. Maris looked at me with sympathy and said she could fix it. I told her to wait. I needed to understand how far my parents were willing to go. I walked to my mother and asked quietly whether there had been a mistake. My mother tilted her head, all innocence. She said the reception was complicated, and sometimes people had to be flexible. She said it was better this way because I could meet new people and Ethan could network. She said she assumed I wouldn't mind. My father added that the wedding wasn't a place for personal drama. He said I should be grateful to be included at all. Included. as if my presence were charity. My mother smiled, leaned closer, and delivered her real message in a tone nobody else would notice. She told me I needed to stop acting like I was equal to Logan. She told me I should be proud that Logan was finally being recognized by the family. She told me that if I wanted a peaceful night, I would sit where I was placed. Dinner began. Ethan took his seat at table 12, but he pulled his chair back and looked at me, waiting. I told him to sit. I told him I would handle it. The look in his eyes said he hated leaving me alone, but he respected my choice. I walked to table 21 and sat down beside strangers, an older couple from Caleb's side, a distant cousin's boyfriend, and two teenagers who looked bored. The service door behind us kept opening and closing, leaking kitchen noise. Every time it opened, a gust of cold air hit the back of my neck like a reminder. Across the room, I watched my parents' table. They were seated near the dance floor with the core family. Logan sat between my parents like a prince. People came up to hug him, to laugh with him, to ask about his future. My mother beamed. My father nodded like a man who had successfully managed a brand. Then came the speeches. Brooke's father cried. Caleb's best man made jokes. The maid of honor talked about friendship. And then my mother stood up. My mother was not the official speaker, but she walked to the microphone like she belonged there. She tapped the glass, smiled at the room, and announced that the family had prepared a special presentation honoring the Reynolds legacy. She said Brooke had been welcomed into an extraordinary family. She said it was important to celebrate the people who carry the family forward. The lights dimmed. The projector screen behind the head table lit up. A slideshow began with black and white photos of grandparents, then my parents' wedding, then childhood shots of cousins. People laughed and pointed. Brooke smiled politely, unaware of what was coming. Then the photos shifted to my immediate family. There was a picture of Logan at 5, grinning in a baseball uniform. A picture of Logan at 10 with a trophy. A picture of Logan at 16 at prom. A picture of Logan in a cap and gown at college. Logan, Logan, Logan. I waited for any picture of me. I watched the slideshow glide past the years where I existed as if I were air. My mother spoke while the photos played. She talked about the Reynolds family values: loyalty, hard work, respect. She talked about how proud she was of her son. She called him the family's hope. She called him the example. Then she did the final edit out loud. She introduced Logan as their only child. Only. The word landed like a physical blow. Ethan's chair scraped against the floor at table 12. I had been collecting evidence for years without calling it evidence. I kept a county record showing a sealed paternity acknowledgement filed when I was 2, and I kept screenshots and voicemails of my parents' pattern. I stood, walked to the planner and the AV tech, and froze the slideshow. Brooke confronted my mother and father on the microphone. Then I stepped forward and said my name. From that point, the night moved fast. My mother tried to pivot into tears and confusion. My father tried to turn the room against me by labeling me sensitive. And my brother tried to stand beside them like a trophy that had been threatened. I kept my voice calm and explained the edits: the seating update from my mother's account, the missing photos, the public only child statement. Then I said the sentence that changed my father's posture. I had county paperwork that explained why this had always felt personal. A sealed note in my file. A name not his. A legal acknowledgement signed when I was 2. My father's face emptied. My mother insisted paperwork could be wrong. But a room full of adults knows what denial sounds like when it's scrambling. Brooke asked whether my father knew. My father didn't answer. Silence did the work for him. The most shocking part wasn't the secret itself. It was how quickly my father used it as permission. He said he had stayed for the image. He said he had focused on the child that was his. He said I was a reminder of a humiliation he never chose. He said something that sounded like a verdict. Maybe he never owed me anything. That was the moment the room stopped treating this like family drama and started treating it like cruelty. It wasn't my tone. It wasn't a shouted accusation. It was a grown man publicly declaring that love was conditional and that a child had failed the condition. Brooke's grandmother, Marjorie, stepped in and ended the performance. She had venue staff and groomsmen guide my parents out to the foyer. My mother protested, my father argued, and Logan hovered, still expecting rescue. But the wedding moved forward without them, and the ballroom breathed again. Maris corrected the seating chart. Ethan and I sat together at table 8. People nearby nodded at me with quiet support. A couple of relatives apologized for not seeing the pattern sooner. Brooke hugged me again and said she was sorry my truth had collided with her celebration, but she was glad it had collided where witnesses could hear it. Later that night, Grandma Elsie took me outside to the courtyard. She said she had known for years. She said my mother had begged her to keep it quiet. Elsie said she had stayed quiet to protect a child, but she hadn't stayed still. She had set up a trust that my parents could not touch, so money and inheritance could never be used as a leash. She also said she had noticed odd paperwork years ago, little accounts that didn't look like mine. Elsie had quietly hired an accountant to confirm the pattern. The drive home to Atlanta felt like leaving a storm. The next week, I pulled my credit report and discovered small accounts I didn't recognize: a utilities account, a subscription bundle, and a medical bill attached to my information. Each one was small enough to dismiss. Together, they spelled entitlement. With Elsie's help, I met an attorney in Atlanta, Carmen Ruiz. Carmen explained that people who live by image often commit harm in increments, staying just under the level that forces consequences. Carmen drafted a formal boundary letter. No contacting my employer, no public claims about my stability, no use of my personal information, and no interference with my relationships. She demanded an accounting of any accounts opened in my name. My parents responded with outrage and victimhood. My mother claimed I was ungrateful. My father claimed I was vindictive. They insisted I was tearing the family apart. They said Logan was suffering. They said Ethan was manipulating me. They tried to turn my boundary into proof that I was unstable. Carmen treated their messages as evidence, not emotion. Records were requested. IP logs were traced. Handwritten forms were matched. The accounts led back to my parents' home network and my mother's handwriting. It wasn't spectacular fraud. It was the everyday theft of identity by people who believed family meant access. We negotiated a settlement that did 3 things. It cleared my name, it forced repayment, and it created enforceable distance. My parents signed because paperwork finally cornered them. Logan called to accuse me of jealousy. I told him I wasn't jealous of a life that required my silence to look good. After the wedding, my mother tried to reclaim the narrative in her town, but she couldn't control the audience anymore. People had seen her on a microphone. People had watched a grown woman erase her daughter in public. The story didn't land the way it used to. A year later, my mother tried to bypass the agreement with a new number and left a voicemail about missing me and wanting to talk. The apology came braided with pressure, the way it always had. I forwarded it to Carmen. The penalty clause triggered. For the first time, my mother learned that a boundary isn't an argument. It is a line. Here is what I learned. Erasure only works when you accept it. When you say nothing, the edited version becomes the official version. When you speak your name out loud, the edit breaks. Not because everyone suddenly becomes kind, because everyone suddenly has to choose what they witnessed. My parents tried to erase me at a wedding because weddings are full of witnesses, and they assumed witnesses would choose politeness over truth. They assumed I would freeze. They assumed the family story would win because it always had. But that night, the story broke. Not because I shouted, because I stood up, took a microphone, and said my name. I didn't lose a family. I lost a role. And when you lose a role built to keep you small, what you gain is space. Space to breathe, space to choose, space to build a life where your seat is not assigned by someone who benefits from you being alone. Before Charleston, my parents practiced smaller erasures. At birthdays, candles were blown out for Logan first because he got excited. At school events, my mother remembered Logan's teachers' names and forgot mine. When relatives visited, Logan's report cards were displayed like art, and mine were folded into drawers. When I got into college, my father framed it as a practical choice I was lucky to earn, while Logan's acceptance letters were described as destiny. In our house, praise was a currency, and I was never issued enough to spend. There was also a rhythm to blame. If Logan broke something, I was asked why I hadn't been watching him. If Logan was rude, I was asked what I had done to provoke him. If Logan forgot an assignment, my mother called his teacher to explain that he was overwhelmed by expectations. If I forgot an assignment, my mother called it a character flaw. It trained me to move through life with my shoulders rounded, as if I could make myself smaller than their disappointment. By my early 20s, I had built a separate reality in Atlanta, but family events still pulled me back like a tide. My mother's invitations were never direct. They came wrapped in obligation. Grandma will be sad, your brother needs support. It would look bad if you didn't come. She used guilt the way some people use perfume, spraying it into the air, until everything smelled like what she wanted. Ethan noticed the first time he met them. At a Thanksgiving dinner, my father asked Ethan what he did for a living, and then immediately shifted to asking Logan about his future, as if Ethan's answer had been a warm-up. My mother complimented my dress with the faintest pause before adding that it was brave to wear that color. Logan spent most of dinner scrolling his phone, then asked Ethan for advice on apartment layouts like Ethan was a free consultant. The whole table laughed when Logan called me intense for asking him to pass the salt. After that dinner, Ethan asked a simple question: "What happens when you stop showing up?" I told him I didn't know. I had never tested the idea. In my family, absence was treated as betrayal, but my presence never earned loyalty. It only made me available. Charleston felt like that test arriving whether I wanted it or not. In the weeks before the wedding, the sabotage came in subtle waves. My +1 disappearing from the RSVP was one wave. Then my hotel room block mysteriously vanished, and I was told there were no more rooms at the family rate. Then I was removed from the shared itinerary email thread and had to get details from Brooke directly. Then the rehearsal dinner seating placed me at the far end near the patio heaters while Logan sat beside the couple's parents, as if he belonged to the center of the story. Each time I pointed out the issue, my mother responded the same way: confusion, then annoyance, then accusation. She acted as if I was inventing problems for attention. She acted as if her mistakes only happened to me by coincidence. She acted as if my noticing was the real crime. On the morning of the wedding, my mother texted that she wanted a family photo before the ceremony. Ethan and I arrived early and found my parents already positioned on the hotel steps with Logan in the middle. A photographer hovered, adjusting the lens. My mother smiled and gestured for me to stand near the edge, not because of lighting, but because of cropping. I saw her glance at the frame like she was composing a future where I could be removed with a simple cut. I stepped closer to Ethan instead, not in defiance, just in alignment. The photographer snapped photos anyway. My mother's smile thinned. My father's eyes narrowed. Logan winked like we were all in on a joke. At the ceremony, when Brooke looked out at the guests, she was glowing. My parents were too. They loved the legitimacy of weddings, the speeches, the family introductions, the public symbolism. If you can control a wedding, you can control a narrative in front of people who are already primed to believe in love and tradition. That was why the guest list mattered. It wasn't just seating, it was proof. If my name was isolated on paper, if Ethan's name stood alone somewhere else, if my parents could present themselves as a family of three, then the room would absorb it as fact. People accept what is printed. People assume someone else checked. The moment my mother said only child into a microphone, she wasn't slipping. She was declaring. She was telling everyone which version of our family should be remembered. She was turning me into an invisible person in a room full of witnesses. When the slideshow froze, I saw a new expression on my mother's face: calculation under pressure. She tried to keep her voice warm, but her eyes scanned the room for allies the way a politician scans an audience. My father's expression was colder. He watched me like I was a problem he could still manage if he used the right label. That label had always worked: sensitive, dramatic, unstable. In a small town, those words are a cage. Say them often enough and people stop asking whether the cage is fair. Brooke's questions changed everything because Brooke asked them publicly. My parents could twist my memories in private, but they couldn't twist the seating chart audit trail. They couldn't twist the slideshow file. They couldn't unsay only child once 200 people heard it. When my father admitted he had stayed for the image, the room didn't just hear a secret. The room heard a motive, and motives make patterns make sense. After my parents were escorted into the foyer, the hotel's marble hallway became a stage of its own. My mother tried to argue with the venue manager. My father tried to demand respect. Logan tried to charm his way back inside. But the manager's expression never changed. Rules are easy to enforce when the person breaking them has already been witnessed. I didn't follow them. I stayed with Brooke. I watched her breathe through the emotional whiplash and choose joy anyway. She danced with Caleb. She cut the cake. She laughed with her friends like she was reclaiming the night. That was another kind of courage, refusing to let someone else's poison define your celebration. Near the end of the reception, Logan came back in through a side door, alone. He looked confused, as if he expected the world to reset. He tried to approach the head table and was stopped gently by a groomsman. He scanned the room and saw eyes on him that were not admiring anymore. He left again without speaking. In the days after the wedding, my parents tried to regroup. My mother called relatives first, telling them I had attacked her. My father texted that he expected an apology. Logan posted photos from the wedding on social media, with captions about family pride, cropping me out as if the crop could become reality. But something had shifted in the family network. People who had witnessed the microphone moment asked questions they never asked before. People who had laughed at my mother's "Ava is dramatic" line started remembering other moments, other cuts, other jokes that had landed too sharply. Witnesses are inconvenient when you rely on secrecy. Brooke's aunt, my mother's sister, called me privately. She didn't excuse Diane. She said she was ashamed. She said she had let my mother set the tone for too long because it was easier than confronting it. She asked what I needed. I told her I needed distance and paperwork. That was where Carmen came in. Carmen didn't care about family dynamics. She cared about facts and remedies. She treated my parents' behavior like what it was: interference, misuse, and defamation risk. She used the language my parents couldn't dismiss. When Carmen's letter arrived at my parents' house, my mother panicked. Not because she suddenly felt remorse, because legal language is a mirror that doesn't flatter. My mother tried to call me immediately, then remembered she had already started texting through the settlement risk. My father tried to assert authority, then realized authority doesn't work on a lawyer. During the investigation, one detail kept repeating: Logan's name as the beneficiary of my parents' choices. The utility account had been used at Logan's apartment. The subscription accounts had shipped to Logan's address. The clinic bill was for a procedure my mother insisted Logan needed, and she routed it through me. My parents weren't stealing for survival. They were stealing to maintain a hierarchy. Carmen asked whether I wanted to press criminal charges. I considered it. I imagined the court dates, the hearings, the long, slow drain. Then I imagined my name clean, my life quiet, my future unhooked from theirs. I chose the path that freed me fastest. The settlement required my parents to pay balances, correct records, and stop using my information. It also required them to stop contacting Ethan. My mother had already tried, sending him a long message about how he didn't understand the real Ava. Ethan forwarded it to me without comment. That was another kind of love, refusing to become a new avenue for manipulation. After the settlement, my parents still tried to win socially. My mother told people I had been influenced by therapy culture. My father told people I was cutting them off because I couldn't handle accountability. But the wedding witnesses had already seen their masks slip. Their story didn't stick as easily. The third twist came quietly, through my grandmother Elsie. She invited me to her house one Sunday and handed me a set of documents. The trust paperwork, signed years earlier. Elsie had also written a letter to be opened if she ever became incapacitated, naming me as her health proxy, not my mother. Elsie said she had watched Diane treat care like control, and she refused to be controlled. Elsie's decision created family shockwaves. My mother had assumed she would inherit responsibility by default. My father had assumed he could shape the story as the reasonable patriarch. Elsie's paperwork cut through both assumptions. It was another public fact they could not charm away. Logan visited Elsie after hearing about it and tried to smooth things over. Elsie listened, then asked him a simple question. How often had he visited her when there was nothing to gain? Logan had no answer. Elsie told him love is a verb, not a performance. A month later, I finally opened the sealed paternity note. It did not change my childhood memories, but it changed the fog around them. My father was not my biological father. My mother had hidden it. My father had stayed anyway. And together they had chosen a family structure where Logan was the proof of legitimacy, and I was the reminder of shame. I didn't call my mother to argue about it. Arguing would have been an invitation. Instead, I sat with Ethan on our balcony and let the truth settle. Ethan asked what I wanted to do with it. I said I wanted to stop making my life a rebuttal. Over time, the family split in a way it never had before. Some relatives stayed close to my parents because it was comfortable. Some stepped back because the wedding had made the cruelty too visible. Some reached out to me, awkward and sincere, saying they wished they had noticed earlier. I accepted the apologies that came with changed behavior. I ignored the apologies that came with excuses. Brooke and Caleb visited Atlanta again that winter, and we had dinner in a small restaurant with warm lighting. Brooke apologized one more time for the chaos at her wedding. I told her she didn't need to. My parents chose the stage. Brooke just refused to let them own it. In the spring, Ethan proposed. It wasn't a grand public moment. It was quiet, just us, on the balcony with city lights and a breeze that smelled like rain. He asked me to build a family with him that didn't require anyone to disappear. I said yes. My parents found out through someone else, and my mother sent one email from a new address. A paragraph of congratulations that ended with a request to be invited. She framed it as a chance to heal. She framed it as forgiveness. She never acknowledged what she had done. She just reached for access. I did not respond. Carmen did. Carmen reminded her of the agreement. Carmen reminded her that a wedding invitation is not an entitlement. Carmen reminded her that consequences are not cruelty. On our wedding website, Ethan and I wrote one sentence under the FAQ section. We are building a day rooted in kindness, safety, and respect. Anyone who cannot support that will not attend. No explanations, no debates. Just a boundary in plain language. When people ask whether I regret speaking up at Brooke's wedding, I tell them the truth. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my parents chose a microphone as a weapon. But I do not regret reclaiming my name in front of witnesses. Because that night wasn't about humiliating them. It was about ending my own erasure. If you are living inside a family that edits you, remember this. You do not need their permission to exist fully. You do not need their approval to set boundaries. And you do not have to wait for the perfect moment to speak your name. The perfect moment never arrives when someone benefits from your silence. My parents tried to erase me with a guest list and a slideshow. They tried to make Logan the center by pushing me to the edge. They tried to convince a room full of strangers that I was not part of my own family. But paper is not reality. And performance is not love. Witnesses saw what they did. And for the first time in my life, I chose myself without apologizing. That is the real ending. Not reconciliation, not revenge, freedom. A seat I choose, a life I build, a name spoken out loud and kept. In the months that followed, I noticed a strange new quiet. When my parents could no longer reach me directly, they tried to reach me through other people. A cousin would text a vague message about how hard Diane was taking everything. An old family friend would ask whether I was really cutting them off forever. It was the same strategy in a different costume. Guilt delivered by proxy. I answered with one line every time. All communication goes through my attorney. Most people stopped after that. The ones who didn't were the ones who benefited from the old system. And that information was useful, too. It told me who to keep close and who to keep far. A boundary has a way of sorting relationships for you. It turns vague discomfort into clarity. It turns maybe I'm overreacting into this is who respects me. I started to realize that the family I was grieving wasn't a real family. It was a story I kept trying to enter, a room I kept knocking on, hoping someone would finally open the door. But you can't earn your way into a place where you were never meant to belong. You can only build your own. So I did. I built it in small choices. Sunday brunch with friends who asked questions and listened. Phone calls with Elsie where my name was spoken gently. Nights with Ethan where the future felt like something we were allowed to imagine. When I picture that ballroom now, I don't see the slideshow or the place card in the corner. I see the moment the screen froze and the room turned its attention to truth. I see Brooke refusing to let cruelty hide behind tradition. I see Marjorie standing up and ending the performance. And I see myself finally understanding something I should have known as a child. Love doesn't require you to disappear. The final loose end was the guest list itself. Brooke sent me a copy a week later, not to reopen the wound, but to show me proof. My name had been removed from the immediate family grouping in the header and placed under extended relatives, like a clerical demotion. My mother had also requested a printed program change that listed my parents and Logan as the Reynolds family. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was an edited document submitted in advance. Seeing it on paper made something in me go calm, because it meant I had not imagined any of it. They had planned it. They had chosen it. And once you accept that, you stop negotiating with the fantasy that they will suddenly become different people. You stop trying to win love from people who treat love like a trophy they hand out to the child who makes them look best. That acceptance is not bitterness. It is peace. It is the moment you stop dragging a heavy door behind you, hoping it will eventually swing open. I kept the program copy in my receipts folder, not because I wanted to punish them, but because it reminded me of my own turning point. If they ever tried to rewrite the night, I would have the printed proof of what they attempted. Then I closed the folder and went back to my life, because the real victory wasn't proving them wrong. The real victory was no longer needing them to admit the truth in order for the truth to be real.